3 years ago, she destroyed his life with a lie. Now he's back, and this time, the truth will be his weapon. Subscribe to the channel and follow along to see how this powerful story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sprawling estate of billionaire magnate Richard Kensington. His daughter, 22-year-old Emily Kensington, sat in the back seat of the family's sleek black limousine, her face pale and tear-streaked. The driver, 35-year-old Marcus Green, a man who had worked for the Kensingtons for over a decade, glanced at her through the rearview mirror, concern etched on his face. "Emily, are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Emily didn't respond. Instead, she stared out the window, her mind racing. Earlier that evening, she had attended a high society party where she had too much to drink. Embarrassed by her behavior and fearing her father's wrath, she concocted a story to shift the blame. When the limo pulled into the Kensington estate, Emily stumbled out, screaming that Marcus had assaulted her. The accusation sent shockwaves through the family. Richard Kensington, a man who valued his reputation above all else, immediately fired Marcus and called the police. Despite Marcus's protests of innocence, the evidence seemed damning. Emily's tearful testimony, combined with her privileged status, led to Marcus's arrest. The trial was a media circus. Marcus maintained his innocence, but the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, his life shattered by the lies of a spoiled young woman who couldn't face the consequences of her actions. 3 years passed. Marcus served his time in silence, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He lost everything: his job, his reputation, and his family. His wife left him, unable to bear the stigma of being married to a convicted criminal. His young son grew up without a father, believing the lies the world told about him. Meanwhile, Emily Kensington continued to live her life of luxury, her guilt buried deep beneath layers of denial. She graduated from an elite university, traveled the world, and attended lavish parties, all while Marcus rotted in a prison cell. But guilt has a way of resurfacing. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Emily would lie awake, haunted by the memory of Marcus's face as he was led away in handcuffs. She tried to drown her guilt in alcohol and drugs, but nothing could silence the voice in her head that whispered, "You ruined an innocent man's life." Marcus was released from prison after serving 3 years of his sentence. The world had moved on, but he hadn't. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and his only goal was to clear his name and make Emily Kensington pay for what she had done. He started by tracking her down. It wasn't hard. Emily's life was well documented on social media. He watched her from afar, studying her routines, her friends, her weaknesses. He bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One night, Emily attended a charity gala at a luxurious hotel. Marcus, dressed in a tailored suit, blended seamlessly with the crowd. He approached her, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and anticipation. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I think you know," he replied, his gaze piercing. "You owe me an apology, and so much more." Emily's face flushed with fear. She tried to walk away, but Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "You ruined my life," he hissed. "Now it's your turn to feel what it's like to lose everything." The charity gala was in full swing, a glittering affair filled with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking glasses. Emily Kensington stood at the center of it all, her emerald green gown catching the light as she laughed at something one of her friends had said. She looked every bit the confident, carefree socialite, but beneath the surface, she was a storm of guilt and anxiety. Marcus Green watched her from across the room, his dark eyes narrowed. He had spent months planning this moment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to confront her. He had followed her to countless events, learning her routines, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Tonight, he was ready. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, but now that it was here, he felt a strange mix of anger and calm. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. "Emily," he said, his voice low but firm. She turned, her smile faltering as she recognized him. Her face went pale and she took a step back, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I think you know," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. Emily glanced around nervously, hoping someone would intervene, but the crowd was too absorbed in their own conversations to notice the tension between them. She tried to walk away, but Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "Let go of me," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Not until you hear what I have to say," Marcus said, his tone icy. "You owe me that much." He led her to a quiet corner of the room, away from prying eyes. Emily's heart raced as she realized she was trapped. She had spent years running from the truth, but now it was staring her in the face, and there was no escape. "You ruined my life," Marcus said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? I lost everything, my job, my family, my freedom, and for what? Because you couldn't face the consequences of your own actions." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but Marcus didn't care. He had spent too many nights in a cold prison cell, dreaming of this moment. He wasn't going to let her tears manipulate him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising. "You think that's enough? You think saying sorry can undo what you've done?" Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared, and I didn't know what else to do." "You could have told the truth," Marcus said, his voice cutting through her excuses like a knife. "But you didn't. You chose to destroy my life instead." He pulled out his phone and pressed record, holding it up so that it captured Emily's face. "Say it," he demanded. "Say what you did." Emily hesitated, her mind racing. She knew what he wanted, but the words stuck in her throat. Admitting the truth would mean facing the consequences, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. "Say it," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the room. A few heads turned in their direction, but Marcus didn't care. He had waited too long for this moment, and he wasn't going to let her off the hook. "I lied," Emily finally said, her voice breaking. "I lied about what happened that night. Marcus didn't do anything wrong. I was drunk, and I was embarrassed, and I didn't want my father to be mad at me. So I made up the story about Marcus assaulting me." Marcus felt a surge of triumph as the words left her mouth, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Hearing her admit the truth didn't bring him the closure he had hoped for. It only reminded him of everything he had lost. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything? To have people look at you like you're a monster? To have your own child grow up thinking you're a criminal?" Emily shook her head, her tears falling faster now. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never meant for any of this to happen." But it did, Marcus said, his voice cold. And now you have to live with it. He stopped the recording and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He had what he needed, proof of her confession. It was enough to clear his name, but it wouldn't bring back the years he had lost. "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to make sure the truth comes out," Marcus said. "You're going to face the consequences of what you've done, just like I did." Emily's heart sank as she realized what that meant. Her father would disown her friends would abandon her, and her life of luxury would be over. She had spent years running from the truth, but now it had caught up with her, and there was no escape. "Please, Marcus," she begged, her voice desperate. "Don't do this. I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life." Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he almost felt sorry for her, but then he remembered the nights he had spent in prison, the pain in his son's eyes when he visited him, the way the world had turned its back on him. "You already ruined my life," he said quietly. "Now it's your turn." He turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing alone in the corner of the room. She watched him go, her heart heavy with guilt and fear. She knew her life would never be the same, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next morning, the recording went viral. The media, once so eager to condemn Marcus, now turned their attention to Emily. Her father, Richard Kensington, was furious. His daughter's lies had tarnished the family name, and he disowned her, cutting her off from the family fortune. Emily's life crumbled. Her friends abandoned her, and she became a pariah in the society she once ruled. She tried to apologize to Marcus, but he refused to see her. "You don't get to apologize," he said coldly. "You don't get to make this right. You have to live with what you've done, just like I did." And so Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, haunted by the memory of Marcus's face as he walked away. She had spent years running from the truth, but now it had caught up with her, and there was no escape. Marcus, on the other hand, found a measure of peace. He used the recording to clear his name and sued the Kensington family for damages. The settlement allowed him to start over, to rebuild his life, but the scars remained, a constant reminder of the lies that had destroyed him. He would never forget what Emily had done, but he refused to let it define him. He had survived, and that was enough. The story of the billionaire's daughter and the driver became a cautionary tale, a reminder that lies have consequences, and that no one is above the law, not even the rich and powerful. In the end, Marcus found a measure of peace. He used the recording to clear his name and sued the Kensington family for damages. The settlement allowed him to start over, to rebuild his life. As for Emily, she disappeared from the public eye, her once glamorous life reduced to ashes. She spent her days volunteering at a women's shelter, trying to atone for her sins. The story of the billionaire's daughter and the driver became a cautionary tale, a reminder that lies have consequences, and that no one is above the law, not even the rich and powerful. To be continued